My name is Victoria Sterling, and for 38 years, my family branded me the black sheep, the disappointment, the cautionary tale whispered about at country club dinners. Tonight, I stand in the ornate reception hall of the National Press Club, watching my golden sister Alexandra work the room with practiced ease. Nobody pays attention to me in my understated navy suit until Senator Morrison himself approaches, his eyes widening with sudden recognition. "Excuse me, but aren't you Justice Sterling?" he asks quietly. Across the room, Alexandra's champagne glass freezes halfway to her lips as decades of family manipulation crumble in that single moment. If you've ever been underestimated by those who should have championed you most, this story is for you. Growing up, Sterling meant everything in Manhattan's Upper East Side. Our family name graced hospital wings, museum plaques, and the letterhead of one of the city's most prestigious law firms. The Sterling legacy was built on legal excellence, judicial appointments, and maintaining an impeccable reputation within New York's legal elite. My parents, Magistrate Judge William Sterling and Corporate Attorney Margaret Sterling, had crystal-clear expectations for their daughters. Attend the finest private schools, graduate summa cum laude from an Ivy League university, join a white-shoe law firm, marry within our social circle, and above all, never embarrass the family name. From my earliest memories, it was evident that my older sister Alexandra embodied everything my parents dreamed of in a Sterling daughter. Alexandra was everything they wanted: brilliant, beautiful, and blessed with an intuitive understanding of how to navigate our rarefied social world. She excelled at Chapin, graduated valedictorian from Dartmouth, and seamlessly transitioned into corporate law at Sullivan and Cromwell. When Alexandra spoke at family dinners, my parents hung on every word. When she brought home partners from appropriate families, they beamed with satisfaction. I was different. Not rebellious in any obvious way, but driven by questions that made my parents uncomfortable. Where Alexandra accepted our family's worldview without question, I probed deeper. While my sister attended charity galas, I buried myself in constitutional law texts and civil rights cases. My parents initially dismissed what they called my intense academic phase, assuming I would eventually conform to family expectations. The first sign of real trouble emerged during my senior year at Spence. My government teacher assigned a project analyzing landmark Supreme Court cases. While most students chose safe, well-established decisions, I selected Brown v. Board of Education and its ongoing implications for educational equity. My research was meticulous, my analysis sophisticated, and my presentation earned recognition from the entire department. Instead of pride, my parents expressed horror when they learned about my project from another parent at the annual auction. "Do you understand how this reflects on us?" my father demanded that evening in his wood-paneled study. "The Ashfords were there tonight, Victoria. Their foundation supports several of our clients, and now they think we've raised some sort of social justice activist." "But the research was academically sound," I protested. "The legal precedent is clear about ongoing inequalities in education funding." My mother sighed, that familiar expression of disappointment crossing her refined features. "Darling, there's legal accuracy, and then there's social appropriateness. You need to learn the distinction." This became the recurring pattern. When I joined the Model UN instead of the debate team like my mother had, it was unnecessarily political. When I expressed interest in constitutional law instead of corporate practice, it was idealistic and impractical. Each choice I made that deviated from the Sterling template was treated as a personal rebellion against family values. By graduation, the contrast between Alexandra and me couldn't have been more pronounced. She had already been accepted early decision to Dartmouth, following our parents' exact trajectory. My sister moved through life with the effortless confidence of someone who had never questioned their predetermined path. Meanwhile, I found myself increasingly drawn to questions of justice and constitutional interpretation. I volunteered at a legal aid clinic, fascinated by how law could be used to protect the vulnerable rather than merely accumulate wealth. The clinic lawyers didn't care about my family connections. They valued my legal reasoning and work ethic. When college application season arrived, I made a decision that permanently altered my relationship with my family. Despite having the credentials and connections for any Ivy League acceptance, I chose to attend the University of Chicago, renowned for its rigorous approach to legal theory and constitutional scholarship. The night I announced my decision, my father's face turned ashen. "You're throwing away generations of sterling tradition," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Chicago? What does that institution offer that Harvard or Yale cannot provide infinitely better?" "A different perspective," I replied, struggling to maintain composure. "An approach to law that emphasizes principle over prestige." "Principles don't build generational wealth or influence," my mother interjected sharply. "What you call perspective, others will call naivety." What neither of them could comprehend was that I had discovered something they had never valued: intellectual integrity. In their view, I had committed an unforgivable sin. I had examined the life they prescribed and found it insufficient. As Alexandra prepared for Dartmouth that fall, relatives and family friends showered her with congratulations and networking opportunities. For me, there were strained smiles and questions that felt like accusations. "Are you certain about this choice, Victoria? Wouldn't it be possible to transfer somewhere more suitable?" What none of them knew was that beneath my facade of quiet determination, I harbored judicial ambitions that would have astounded them all. I didn't just want to practice law. I wanted to interpret it, to shape constitutional doctrine from the bench. But I kept these dreams private, knowing they would only provide my family with more ammunition for their disapproval. The day I left for Chicago, my grandmother, Justice Ruth Sterling, a retired federal appeals court judge, slipped an envelope into my hands. "Constitutional interpretation requires both intellectual courage and moral clarity," the note inside read. "Never compromise either for acceptance." It was the only encouragement I received from anyone in my family, and I treasured it like a sacred text. The University of Chicago Law School proved to be exactly what I had hoped for and everything my family had feared. Here, rigorous intellectual debate was prized over social connections, and challenging conventional wisdom was encouraged rather than discouraged. For the first time in my life, I felt intellectually liberated. During my first semester, I enrolled in constitutional theory with Professor Elena Vasquez, a former Supreme Court clerk known for her exacting standards and brilliant legal mind. From the moment she called on me in that first class, challenging my analysis of substantive due process, I knew I had found a mentor who would push me beyond my comfort zone. "You have natural instincts for constitutional interpretation," Professor Vasquez told me after class one day. "But you need to develop confidence in your own analytical abilities. Stop seeking approval and start seeking truth." Those words were revolutionary for someone raised to value family acceptance above personal conviction. They gave me permission to trust my own legal reasoning rather than constantly seeking validation from others. While I immersed myself in constitutional doctrine and legal theory, Alexandra thrived at Dartmouth. My parents' social media accounts featured constant updates about her achievements: Dean's List recognition, prestigious internships, networking events with prominent alumni. Our trajectories couldn't have been more different. During my second year, I secured a position with the university's Constitutional Law Clinic, representing clients in civil rights cases. We challenged discriminatory housing practices, defended First Amendment rights, and advocated for equal protection under the law. When our work resulted in a significant legal precedent protecting voting rights, I experienced fulfillment unlike anything I had ever known. This wasn't abstract theory. This was constitutional law making tangible differences in people's lives. I realized then that my calling wasn't just to understand the Constitution, but to be part of its continuing evolution through judicial interpretation. Holiday breaks became increasingly difficult. What had been subtle disapproval from my family hardened into open dismissal of my interests and achievements. At Christmas of my second year, Alexandra regaled the table with stories of her summer internship at Goldman Sachs. My father listened with evident pride, asking detailed questions about her corporate deals and client relationships. "And what about you, Victoria?" my Uncle James asked during a lull in conversation. "Still pursuing that constitutional thing?" Before I could answer, my father interjected. "Victoria is still finding her direction. Hopefully, she'll develop more practical aspirations before graduation." I stared at my plate, swallowing both my response and my hurt. Actually, I said quietly, I've been offered a Supreme Court clerkship interview. The table fell silent until my mother forced a tight smile. How interesting. Though I imagine the competition must be quite intense. It's one of the most prestigious positions available to law students, I replied. The experience would be invaluable for constitutional practice. My father scoffed. Constitutional practice? Victoria, you need to think about financial reality. Supreme Court clerks might gain prestige, but they don't build wealth. What's your actual career plan? His question revealed everything wrong with our family's approach to success. They measured achievement solely through financial accumulation rather than intellectual contribution or public service. Professor Vasquez became my anchor during these years. She understood my growing interest in judicial service and connected me with opportunities to develop expertise in constitutional interpretation. Under her guidance, I published articles in prestigious law reviews and participated in constitutional law conferences. Judicial service requires more than legal knowledge, she told me. It demands intellectual humility, moral courage, and unwavering commitment to constitutional principles. You possess all three qualities. By graduation, I had built an extraordinary academic record. Summa cum laude, Order of the Coif, editor of the Law Review, and the Supreme Court clerkship I had mentioned to my family. When Justice Patricia Chin offered me the position, I felt vindicated in my unconventional choices. My family's reaction was characteristically lukewarm. When I called to share the news, my mother's response was swift and cutting. A clerkship, how nice. Though I suppose it's just temporary employment. What will you do afterward for a real career? This is real career preparation, I insisted. Supreme Court clerks often become federal judges themselves. Federal judges? My father laughed harshly. Victoria, be realistic. Judgeships require political connections and family influence, things you've been systematically rejecting. You can't build a judicial career on idealism alone. His words stung because they revealed how little he understood about my ambitions or capabilities. They saw my choices as naive idealism rather than strategic career development. The Supreme Court clerkship transformed my understanding of constitutional law and judicial decision-making. Working directly with Justice Chin, I helped research and draft opinions that would shape American jurisprudence for generations. The intellectual rigor was extraordinary, but so was the responsibility. Constitutional interpretation is both art and science, Justice Chin explained during one of our regular discussions. We must balance textual analysis, historical understanding, and contemporary application. It requires wisdom beyond mere legal knowledge. During my clerkship year, Alexandra graduated from Dartmouth and immediately joined Skadden ARPs as a corporate associate. My parents' pride was unmistakable, their social media filled with photos from her law firm's recruiting events and client dinners. Meanwhile, my work remained largely invisible to anyone outside legal circles. Family gatherings became exercises in endurance. At Alexandra's law school graduation party, I overheard my mother explaining my career to a family friend. Victoria is still in her academic phase, working for a judge. We're hoping she'll transition to serious practice soon. The dismissal of my Supreme Court position as merely working for a judge revealed how little they understood about the federal judiciary or constitutional law. To them, any position that didn't immediately generate substantial income was temporary and inconsequential. After my clerkship, I joined the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, prosecuting cases involving constitutional violations. The work was challenging and meaningful, defending fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution. When our team successfully argued a landmark case before the Supreme Court, establishing new precedent for educational equity, I knew I had found my calling. My personal life also began to flourish. I met David Martinez at a constitutional law conference. A federal prosecutor with shared values and intellectual curiosity, David understood my passion for public service without questioning its financial limitations. Unlike my family, he saw my career choices as admirable rather than impractical. My family's response to our relationship was predictably complicated. When I brought David to Thanksgiving dinner, my parents were polite but distant. His background as a first-generation college graduate and federal prosecutor clearly didn't meet their social expectations. "He seems dedicated to his work," my mother said later, a comment designed to sound positive while conveying subtle disapproval. In Sterling family code, dedicated to his work meant someone who prioritized career over wealth accumulation. By 30, I had established myself as a respected constitutional lawyer with a growing reputation for both scholarly excellence and practical litigation skills. When a federal district court position opened in the Southern District of New York, several mentors encouraged me to pursue the nomination. The appointment process was rigorous, involving extensive background checks, interviews with senators, and public hearings. Throughout it all, my family remained notably absent from any celebration or support. They attended the confirmation hearing, sitting stiffly in the gallery, but offered no words of encouragement. When my nomination was confirmed and I was sworn in as a federal district judge at 31, making me one of the youngest appointees in recent history, my parents' response was characteristically qualified. "We're surprised by your appointment," my mother said during the obligatory congratulatory phone call. "Though I suppose it's quite an achievement for someone so young." Even this historic accomplishment was framed as surprising rather than the natural result of years of dedicated work and intellectual excellence. Their inability to acknowledge my legitimate achievements only strengthened my resolve to continue forging my own path. District court work proved intellectually stimulating and practically meaningful. I handled complex constitutional cases, established important legal precedents, and gained recognition for thoughtful, well-reasoned opinions. Legal scholars began citing my decisions, and colleagues respected my analytical approach to difficult constitutional questions. Meanwhile, Alexandra had become a partner at her firm, specializing in corporate mergers and acquisitions. My parents' social circle regularly heard updates about her latest deals and client victories. At family events, conversations inevitably centered on Alexandra's professional success, while my judicial work was treated as an interesting but inconsequential hobby. Alexandra closed another $100 million transaction. My father would announce at dinner parties while I sat quietly, knowing any mention of my recent constitutional ruling would be met with polite but dismissive responses. The opportunity for elevation came during my 7th year on the district court. When Justice Martinez announced his retirement from the Supreme Court, creating a vacancy, several constitutional law experts privately suggested I might be considered for the nomination. The possibility seemed both thrilling and terrifying. Supreme Court appointments required extensive political vetting, public scrutiny, and confirmation by the Senate. At 38, I would be among the youngest nominees in court history if selected. When the White House reached out to discuss my potential nomination, I knew my life was about to change dramatically. The vetting process was exhaustive, examining every aspect of my background, judicial philosophy, and personal life. David and I had married 2 years earlier, and the investigators scrutinized our relationship, finances, and public statements. Throughout this process, my family remained notably uninformed and uninvolved. I shared updates with my grandmother Ruth, now in her 80s but still sharp, but kept details from my parents who had consistently demonstrated they couldn't be trusted with sensitive information. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. "Justice Sterling," the President's counsel began, "the President would like to nominate you for Associate Justice of the Supreme Court." I sat in my chambers, processing the magnitude of the moment. At 38, I was about to be nominated to the highest court in the nation, the culmination of everything I had worked toward since law school. My first call was to David, who responded with joy and immediate support. My second was to Professor Vasquez, who had mentored me through every step of this journey. "You've earned this," she said simply. "Trust your preparation and your principles." When I finally called my parents to share the news, their response was swift and predictable. "The Supreme Court?" my mother repeated, as if I had announced plans to join a traveling circus. "Victoria, are you certain this is wise? The confirmation process will be quite public." "It's the Supreme Court, Mom," I said, struggling to maintain patience. "This is the pinnacle of judicial service." "Yes, but think about the scrutiny," my father added. "Your decisions will be questioned, analyzed, criticized. Is that really the kind of attention you want for the family? Their concern wasn't about my qualifications or readiness for the position, but about how my nomination might reflect on them. Even this extraordinary achievement was filtered through their lens of social reputation rather than individual accomplishment. The nomination announcement created a media firestorm. Constitutional law experts praised my judicial record, scholarly background, and intellectual approach to legal interpretation. News profiles highlighted my rise from district court to Supreme Court nominee in just 7 years, emphasizing my expertise in civil rights and constitutional doctrine. My family's response to the media attention was telling. When reporters contacted them for comment, my parents provided carefully worded statements that managed to sound supportive while conveying minimal enthusiasm. "Victoria has always been intellectually curious," my mother told one journalist. "We're interested to see how this develops." The confirmation hearings were intense, but manageable. Years of constitutional scholarship and judicial experience had prepared me for senators' questions about legal precedent, judicial philosophy, and constitutional interpretation. I testified for 3 days, demonstrating both technical expertise and thoughtful reasoning. During breaks in the hearings, I noticed my family in the gallery. They attended each session but sat separately from David and my few supporters, maintaining distance even during this pivotal moment in my career. When the Senate voted to confirm my nomination by a comfortable margin, I became the youngest Associate Justice appointed to the Supreme Court in over a century. The swearing-in ceremony was scheduled for the following month, allowing time for celebration and preparation. The night after confirmation, my parents hosted what they called a family dinner at their Upper East Side townhouse. The event felt more like a reluctant acknowledgement than a celebration, with my mother focusing on logistics rather than the historic nature of my appointment. "I suppose you'll need to relocate to Washington," she said over dinner, as if discussing a minor job transfer rather than appointment to the nation's highest court. "The court is in session most of the year," I replied. "David and I will maintain residences in both cities." My father nodded absently. Quite an adjustment. Though I imagine the salary is reasonable for government work. His focus on financial compensation revealed everything wrong with our family's values. Here I was, appointed to shape constitutional law for decades, and his primary concern was government salary scales. Alexandra, to her credit, seemed genuinely proud of my achievement. "This is incredible, Victoria," she said during a private moment. "I don't think I understood how significant your career had become." Her admission was both gratifying and painful. My own sister hadn't recognized the trajectory of my professional development because our family consistently minimized my accomplishments. 2 months after confirmation, I was sworn in as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court in a ceremony attended by legal luminaries, constitutional scholars, and government officials. Chief Justice Roberts administered the oath, while David held the Constitution I would swear to uphold. In that moment, standing before the assembled crowd, I thought about my grandmother's words years earlier. Constitutional interpretation requires both intellectual courage and moral clarity. I had spent 2 decades developing both qualities, often without family support or recognition. My parents attended the ceremony but left immediately afterward, declining invitations to the reception. Their discomfort with my achievement was palpable, as if my success somehow threatened their worldview about appropriate career paths. During my first term on the court, I quickly established myself as a thoughtful, principled justice willing to engage complex constitutional questions with both intellectual rigor and moral clarity. My opinions drew praise from legal scholars across the political spectrum, and my questioning during oral arguments demonstrated deep understanding of constitutional doctrine. The work was intellectually demanding but profoundly fulfilling. Each case required careful analysis of constitutional text, historical precedent, and contemporary application. I was helping shape the fundamental law that governed American democracy. Meanwhile, my family continued their pattern of qualified acknowledgement. When legal magazines featured profiles of my judicial philosophy, my mother would mention them briefly at social gatherings. "Victoria was in some legal publication," she would say, as if constitutional law journals were equivalent to local newsletters. The transformation came during my second year on the court, at an event that would finally shatter their narrative about my supposed failures. The American Bar Association was hosting its annual gala, recognizing excellence in legal practice and judicial service. As the court's newest justice, I was invited to speak about constitutional interpretation in the modern era. The event was held at the Kennedy Center, bringing together the nation's legal elite, prominent politicians, and distinguished judges. I knew Alexandra would be attending as a representative of her firm, which was a major sponsor of the event. I chose a simple but elegant black suit for the occasion, appropriate for the formal setting while maintaining the understated dignity befitting a Supreme Court justice. David, handsome in his tuxedo, squeezed my hand as we entered the grand foyer. "Remember who you are now," he whispered. "Associate Justice Victoria Sterling. You've earned every bit of recognition you received tonight." The ballroom was magnificent, filled with the nation's most influential legal minds. From the entrance, I immediately spotted Alexandra across the room, networking confidently in a stunning red gown. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, every inch the successful corporate attorney she had become. Due to my preference for substance over ceremony and my relative youth on the court, many attendees didn't immediately recognize me. I could move through the crowd without the constant attention that more senior justices attracted, allowing me to observe the room's dynamics. My table was strategically placed near the front, reflecting my position on the court but allowing for dignified engagement with other attendees. Throughout dinner, I maintained pleasant conversation with fellow judges and legal scholars, none of whom mentioned Alexandra or questioned our separate seating. Between the main course and dessert, I excused myself to visit the ladies' room. As I moved through the ballroom, I overheard fragments of conversation that made my stomach tighten. "That's one of the Sterling girls, isn't it? The one who—" I heard from Margaret that she never quite found her direction. Such a shame with their family's legal tradition. Alexandra is the successful one. Partner at Skadden, working on billion-dollar deals. The other one went into government work. By the time I returned to my table, my confidence had been shaken. Despite everything I had accomplished here in my home legal community, I was still defined by my family's narrative, the failed Sterling, the disappointment, the sister who had chosen unwisely. After dessert, the ABA president took to the podium to deliver remarks about excellence in legal service. I half-listened as he spoke about the importance of constitutional interpretation and judicial integrity, my thoughts still tangled in the overheard conversations. I barely registered when he announced that distinguished guests would be circulating to personally thank key supporters and recognize outstanding legal achievement. Lost in thought, I didn't immediately notice when a hush fell over our section of the ballroom. Looking up, I found Senator Morrison himself approaching our table, flanked by staff and security. The senior senator from New York, chair of the Judiciary Committee that had confirmed my nomination, stopped directly at our table. His eyebrows raised slightly as he focused on me, confusion crossing his features before recognition dawned. "Excuse me, but aren't you Justice Sterling?" he asked, his voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet room. The table went silent. Around us, conversations had stopped as people strained to observe the interaction. Behind Senator Morrison, I could see Alexandra frozen in place across the room, her champagne glass halfway to her lips, face draining of color as she realized what was happening. I stood, extending my hand professionally. "Yes, Senator Morrison. It's a pleasure to see you again." Senator Morrison clasped my hand warmly, his initial surprise transforming into genuine warmth. "Justice Sterling, I had no idea you would be attending tonight. Your recent opinion on Fourth Amendment privacy rights was masterful. Truly exceptional constitutional analysis." From the corner of my eye, I could see Alexandra standing motionless, her professional composure cracking as the reality of my position became undeniably public. Around us, whispered conversations had resumed as people tried to process what they were witnessing. "I've been meaning to discuss your judicial philosophy with colleagues," Senator Morrison continued, seemingly oblivious to the growing attention our conversation was attracting. "Your approach to constitutional interpretation is exactly what the court needed. Fresh perspective combined with rigorous scholarship." It was then that Senator Morrison glanced toward where Alexandra stood, clearly recognizing her from previous legal events. His brow furrowed slightly as he looked between us. Sterling, is there relation? The name isn't particularly common in legal circles. Before I could respond, Alexandra had approached our group, her face now composed but notably pale. Senator Morrison, she said smoothly, Justice Sterling is my sister. Senator Morrison's surprise was evident. Your sister? I had no idea you had a sister on the Supreme Court. He looked between us, clearly reassessing some internal narrative. How remarkable. Why haven't you mentioned this connection? The moment hung suspended, nearby tables now openly watching the drama unfold. Alexandra's career, built partially on family legal connections and reputation, suddenly faced a complicated public revelation. Family and professional life can be complex, Senator. Alexandra offered weakly, her usual confidence notably absent. Indeed they can, I interjected smoothly, protecting her from further embarrassment. But ultimately, we all serve justice in our own ways. Senator Morrison, a skilled politician himself, quickly recognized the undercurrents and pivoted gracefully. Well, this is a wonderful discovery. A family of legal excellence. Quite impressive. As the senator moved on to other tables, Alexandra and I were left in an awkward silence. Years of family dismissal and professional separation had been compressed into a single, very public moment. Victoria, she began, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. I didn't know you would be here tonight. As a Supreme Court justice, it would be unusual to exclude me from the ABA's premier event. I replied evenly, keeping my tone professional despite years of hurt. That's not what I meant, she said, looking around at the attention we were still receiving. We should talk. Not here, but soon. Should we? I asked, meeting her gaze directly. After years of silence? After our family actively misrepresented my career to everyone in their circle? Around us, the room had returned to normal conversation levels, though I noticed several people still observing our interaction with poorly concealed interest. Before Alexandra could respond, the ABA president approached our area. Justice Sterling, he said warmly, would you mind joining us for a few words? I think the attendees would appreciate hearing from the court's newest member. Of course, I replied, straightening my shoulders. The invitation clearly elevated my status at the event, making my professional standing undeniable to everyone present. As I moved toward the podium, I felt a weight lifting. The burden of hiding, of being diminished, of accepting my family's narrative about my life was finally lifting. Here in this room where I had entered as the disappointing Sterling sister, I was now being recognized as Justice Sterling, respected for my own accomplishments rather than measured against family expectations. My impromptu remarks focused on constitutional interpretation and the responsibility of legal professionals to uphold democratic principles. The audience listened attentively, many taking notes on my observations about the court's role in American governance. When I concluded and returned to mingle, the remainder of the evening passed differently than it had begun. Legal professionals who had barely acknowledged my arrival now sought me out for conversations about constitutional doctrine, judicial philosophy, and Supreme Court procedure. Through it all, I maintained professional composure, neither gloating over the revelation nor appearing affected by the years of family dismissal it had exposed. David remained at my side, quietly proud of how I handled the unexpected attention with grace and dignity. As we prepared to leave, Senator Morrison approached once more, this time without his entourage. Justice Sterling, he said quietly, I hope you'll forgive my earlier confusion. Had I known of your relationship to Miss Sterling, I would have ensured a more appropriate recognition of your presence. No apology necessary, Senator, I assured him. Family circumstances can be complicated. He nodded thoughtfully. Indeed. Though I must say, having observed your judicial work closely, I find myself questioning any narrative that would diminish your extraordinary accomplishments. You're precisely the kind of justice our Constitution deserves. Thank you, Senator. That means a great deal. As our car pulled away from the Kennedy Center, David took my hand. You handled that with incredible dignity. I've had years of practice, I replied, watching the illuminated building recede behind us. But something feels different now, like the truth has finally broken through. The truth was always there, David said gently. But now others can see it too. In that moment, I realized that while reconciliation with my family remained uncertain, I had achieved something perhaps more valuable. I had reclaimed my own narrative. No longer would I be defined by what the Sterling family said about me. I had written my own story of constitutional service and judicial excellence, and now that story stood on its own merits for all to see. The revelation at the ABA Gala created ripples that extended far beyond that single evening. By the next morning, legal publications and political blogs had picked up the story of the Sterling sisters' unexpected reunion, complete with speculation about our family dynamics and the court's newest justice. 3 days after the gala, my phone rang with a number I recognized but hadn't seen in months. My father's private line. "Victoria," he began without preamble. "I understand you attended the ABA Gala." "I did," I replied evenly, as would be expected for a Supreme Court justice. There was a pause, silence heavy with unspoken history. "Your mother and I have been discussing recent developments. We feel it might be appropriate to have dinner while you're in the city, to clear the air." The careful phrasing wasn't lost on me. Not an apology, not an admission of wrongdoing, merely an acknowledgement that circumstances had changed enough to warrant reconsideration. "I appreciate the invitation," I said carefully. "But I think before any family dinner, we need to have an honest conversation about the past several years." "The past is the past, Victoria," my father replied, his tone suggesting irritation at my lack of immediate agreement. "Looking backward serves no productive purpose." "I disagree," I said firmly. "You and Mom have actively minimized my achievements for years. You've portrayed me as directionless when I was building a distinguished judicial career. That needs to be acknowledged." Another long silence followed. "Perhaps we've had different perspectives on your choices," he finally offered, the closest thing to an admission I was likely to receive. "It's not about perspectives, Dad. It's about respect. You couldn't respect that I chose constitutional law over corporate practice. Instead of supporting me, you dismissed me for it." The vulnerability in my statement hung between us. In all our conflicts, I had rarely allowed myself to express the personal pain their rejection had caused. "Victoria," my father said, his voice softening slightly, "family relationships are complicated. Perhaps we could start fresh. Your position on the court is significant. We can build from there." The qualified acknowledgement was so typical of my father, unable to simply say he was proud or that he had been wrong. Instead, he offered conditional approval now that my success had become too prominent to deny. "I need time to think about this," I told him. "And if we do meet, David will be there as well. He's my family now, the family who supported me when you and Mom wouldn't." "As you wish," my father replied stiffly. "Let us know your decision." After hanging up, I sat in my chambers, emotions swirling. Part of me wanted to reject the overture entirely, to tell my parents they had forfeited the privilege of being in my life. Another part, the daughter who had always craved their approval, wanted to embrace any possibility of reconciliation, however limited. David helped me find the middle path. "You don't have to decide everything at once," he counseled. "You can set boundaries while still leaving the door open." 2 weeks later, I met my parents at a private dining room in a discreet restaurant near the court. David sat beside me, his quiet strength reinforcing my resolve. The conversation was strained but civil, focusing primarily on surface-level topics: my adjustment to the court, David's caseload, our plans for the upcoming recess. When my mother finally addressed our estrangement, her approach was characteristically indirect. "We may not have always understood your career choices, Victoria, but we never stopped caring about you." "Caring isn't the same as respecting," I replied evenly. "You didn't just misunderstand my choices. You actively dismissed them. You told people I was struggling professionally when I was succeeding." My father shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we were hasty in our assessments." It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to receive. Not "we were wrong," But we were hasty, maintaining plausible deniability while offering minimal concession. Moving forward, I said carefully, I need honesty. If you want to be part of my life, you need to respect the life I've built, my career, my marriage, my choices. I won't accept anything less. The dinner ended with tentative plans for future contact, but no real resolution. As we left, my mother embraced me stiffly, whispering, "We are proud of you, Victoria." In our way. Those qualified words encapsulated our relationship perfectly, acknowledgement wrapped in conditions, acceptance limited by their worldview. Alexandra proved more complicated. A week after the gala, she requested a private meeting at a coffee shop near the Supreme Court. When I arrived, she looked different than she had at the ABA event, less polished, more vulnerable, with shadows under her eyes suggesting sleepless nights. "I owe you an apology," she said after we'd ordered our coffee. "Not just for the gala, but for years of complicity in the family narrative about your career." Her directness surprised me. "What kind of complicity?" "I knew what Mom and Dad were saying about you at social events," she clarified. "I knew it wasn't accurate. I knew you were achieving incredible things, but I never corrected them, never defended you." "Why didn't you?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for years finally spoken aloud. Alexandra stared into her coffee. "Because it was easier not to. As long as you were considered the family disappointment, I didn't have to examine whether I was actually happy with my own choices. I could be the success story, without questioning whether I was living authentically." "And are you? Living authentically?" Her hesitation told me everything. "I'm successful by their definition," she finally said. "But watching you forge your own path, standing on your principles even when it cost you family support, it's made me question everything." Our conversation that day didn't immediately repair years of distance, but it opened a door. Unlike our parents, Alexandra seemed genuinely interested in rebuilding our relationship based on honesty rather than family mythology. Over the following months, we began exchanging text messages and meeting for coffee when our schedules aligned. Alexandra shared her growing dissatisfaction with corporate law, her sense that she had built a career to please others rather than fulfill herself. I offered perspective without judgment, understanding better than anyone the weight of family expectations. "I used to resent your independence," she admitted during one of our meetings. "You had the courage to disappoint them, while I spent my entire life trying to be perfect according to their standards." "Independence came at a cost," I reminded her. "I lost years of family relationships. Sometimes I wonder if there was a middle path I never considered." "But you found your calling," Alexandra said. "You're shaping constitutional law, protecting rights, making decisions that will matter for generations." "I'm helping rich corporations get richer." Her honesty was both painful and liberating. We were finally talking as sisters rather than competing for parental approval. The transformation in our family dynamics accelerated during my third year on the court. A major constitutional case involving corporate speech and political contributions came before us, generating significant media attention. When the court issued its opinion, a complex decision balancing First Amendment rights with campaign finance regulation, legal scholars praised my concurring opinion for its nuanced analysis. The case received extensive coverage in the business press, including an interview with a corporate attorney who had argued similar cases. The attorney happened to be from Alexandra's firm, and during the interview, she mentioned having a colleague whose sister served on the Supreme Court. "It must be fascinating to have such intimate access to constitutional interpretation," the interviewer observed. "Actually," Alexandra replied, her voice carrying a note of pride I hadn't heard before, "my sister Justice Sterling maintains appropriate boundaries. We discuss constitutional philosophy in general terms, but she never discusses pending cases or internal court deliberations. Her judicial ethics are impeccable." When I read the interview transcript, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. My sister defending me, publicly acknowledging both our relationship and my professional integrity. It was a small moment, but it signaled a fundamental shift in how she viewed our dynamic. 6 months later, Alexandra made a decision that shocked our entire family. She resigned from her partnership to join the ACLU as a senior staff attorney, focusing on corporate accountability and constitutional rights. "I want to use my legal skills for something meaningful," she explained to me over dinner. Watching her career made me realize that success isn't just about prestige or money. It's about using your talents to serve something larger than yourself. Our parents were devastated. The golden daughter, their perfect example of sterling family values, had abandoned everything they prized for nonprofit work that barely paid a living wage. "Have you both lost your minds?" my father demanded during a tense family conference call. "First Victoria pursues this judicial idealism. Now you're throwing away a partnership for activist work. What has happened to this family?" "Maybe we've finally learned to think for ourselves," Alexandra replied calmly. "Victoria showed me it was possible to choose principle over approval." The conversation ended badly, but something had crystallized. Alexandra and I were no longer competing for family acceptance. We were supporting each other in choosing authentic lives over prescribed ones. My 5th year on the court brought a case that would define my judicial legacy. The constitutional challenge involved digital privacy rights and government surveillance, requiring the court to interpret Fourth Amendment protections in the context of modern technology. The case attracted national attention, with constitutional scholars, civil liberties advocates, and government officials closely watching our deliberations. The questions were complex. How do 18th century constitutional protections apply to 21st century digital surveillance? What reasonable expectation of privacy exists in an interconnected world? During oral arguments, I asked questions that demonstrated deep understanding of both constitutional doctrine and technological reality. My inquiries helped clarify the legal issues while revealing the stakes for individual privacy rights. When we issued our decisions 6 months later, my majority opinion struck a careful balance between security concerns and constitutional protections. The ruling established new precedent for digital privacy while providing clear guidelines for law enforcement and intelligence agencies. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Constitutional law professors called it a masterpiece of legal reasoning, technology experts praised its practical understanding of digital systems, and civil liberties organizations hailed it as a landmark victory for constitutional rights. 2 days after the decision was announced, my phone rang with an unexpected call. Chief Justice Roberts himself was on the line. "Victoria," he said, using my first name as he rarely did, "I wanted to personally commend your work on the surveillance case. Your opinion demonstrates exactly the kind of judicial reasoning the court needs, rigorous, principled, and practically grounded." "Thank you, Chief Justice." The case required careful balance between competing constitutional values. Indeed it did, and you found that balance brilliantly. I also wanted you to know that your colleagues have taken notice. Your judicial philosophy and analytical approach have earned considerable respect around here. The call was brief, but significant. Recognition from the Chief Justice carried weight far beyond personal validation. It suggested my position on the court was not only secure, but influential. That evening, as David and I celebrated quietly at home, I reflected on the journey from black sheep to respected jurist. The path had been lonely at times, requiring me to choose principle over family harmony, but it had led to a life of genuine purpose and intellectual fulfillment. "Do you ever regret it?" David asked, as if reading my thoughts. "The family conflict, the years of distance?" "I regret that it was necessary," I said carefully. "But I don't regret the choices I made. If I had compromised my convictions to maintain family relationships, I wouldn't be the person you married or the justice I've become. And now I have both. A career that fulfills me and family relationships that are finally honest. Alexandra and I talk regularly. My parents are still complicated, but they at least respect what I've accomplished. It's not perfect, but it's authentic." The transformation became complete the following year during my parents' 50th wedding anniversary celebration. The event was held at their country club, attended by the same social circle that had witnessed years of their disappointment in my choices. As guests mingled during the cocktail hour, I overheard my mother speaking with a family friend, the same woman who had once questioned my career direction. "Margaret, you must be so proud of both your daughters," the friend was saying. Alexandra's transition to civil rights work is admirable, and Victoria's Supreme Court career is simply extraordinary. We are indeed, my mother replied, her voice carrying genuine warmth I hadn't heard before. Victoria has shown remarkable strength and principle throughout her career. Her recent constitutional opinion on digital privacy has been widely praised. And to think she accomplished all this so young. She must have been incredibly focused and determined. She was, my mother agreed. We didn't always understand her path, but she knew where she was going even when we couldn't see it. It wasn't a full apology or complete acknowledgement of their past behavior, but it was progress. My mother was publicly taking pride in my accomplishments rather than minimizing them. During a formal dinner, my father stood to make remarks about family, legacy, and the future. As he spoke about the importance of sterling family values, his words took an unexpected turn. "Margaret and I have learned that strength comes in many forms," he said, looking directly at Alexandra and me. "We raised our daughters to think independently and act with conviction. They have both exceeded our expectations, though not always in ways we initially anticipated." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Victoria, your service on the Supreme Court honors not just our family, but the constitutional principles our nation depends upon. Alexandra, your commitment to justice and civil rights demonstrates that success means using your talents to serve others." The room applauded, but I was focused on the significance of my father's words. After years of disappointment and dismissal, he was publicly acknowledging that my path had been not just acceptable, but honorable. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, my grandmother Ruth approached me. At 87, she remained sharp and dignified, her eyes bright with satisfaction. "You vindicated everything I hoped for when I gave you that note years ago," she said quietly. "Constitutional interpretation does require intellectual courage and moral clarity, and you've demonstrated both throughout your career. Your encouragement meant everything, grandmother. It sustained me through the difficult years." "The difficult years taught you resilience," she replied. "Easy approval creates weak character. You had to build strength without family support, and that strength now serves the entire nation through your judicial service." Her words encapsulated the unexpected gift of family rejection. It had forced me to develop internal conviction rather than external validation, creating a foundation strong enough to support constitutional interpretation at the highest level. As David and I drove home that night, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't expected to achieve. The journey from family disappointment to respected jurist was finally, fully complete. "What are you thinking about?" David asked as we crossed the Potomac back into Washington. "How strange life is," I said. "I spent so many years seeking their approval, then years rebuilding after their rejection. Now I have something better than either, their respect and my own integrity intact." "And the court? How do you feel about the work itself?" I considered the question seriously. Every case reminds me why I chose this path. Constitutional interpretation isn't just academic exercise, it's the foundation of democratic governance. When we interpret the Fourth Amendment, we're defining the relationship between citizens and their government. When we consider free speech protections, we're shaping the boundaries of democratic discourse. "Heavy responsibility. Extraordinary privilege," I corrected. "I get to participate in the continuing evolution of constitutional law. The framers created a document designed to grow and adapt, and we're part of that process." 6 months later, at a judicial conference in Chicago, I encountered Professor Vasquez, now in her 70s, but still teaching constitutional law. She had followed my career closely, taking pride in her former students' achievements. "You've become exactly the kind of justice I hoped you would be," she told me during a quiet moment between sessions. "Principled but not rigid, scholarly but practically grounded." "I owe much of that to your mentorship," I replied. "You taught me to trust my analytical abilities rather than seeking constant approval." "You taught yourself that," she corrected gently. "I simply provided permission to trust what you already knew." As our conversation continued, I realized that the lessons learned through family rejection had prepared me perfectly for judicial service. Supreme Court justices must be willing to make unpopular decisions based on constitutional principle rather than public approval. The independence I had developed through years of family disappointment now served the entire nation. The story of Justice Victoria Sterling, the family black sheep who became a constitutional guardian, was finally complete. But more importantly, it was a story still being written with each case, each opinion, each moment when constitutional principle required courage to uphold justice over convenience. In the end, being underestimated by those who should have championed me most had become the greatest gift of all. It forced me to champion myself, to develop the internal strength necessary for constitutional interpretation, and to build a career on principle rather than approval. Standing in my chambers now, looking out at the Capitol Dome where democracy's daily work continues, I understand that every moment of family rejection contributed to this moment of judicial service. The black sheep had become the guardian, and the Constitution was stronger for it. The nameplate on my door reads simply, Justice Sterling, but the journey to earn that title required becoming someone my family never expected and I never dared to dream. A woman strong enough to interpret the Constitution with both intellectual courage and moral clarity, serving not family expectations, but the highest principles of American democracy. That transformation, from disappointment to distinction, from rejection to respect, proves that sometimes the greatest gift others can give us is the necessity to become ourselves.